Canadian football was born in the mid-1800s, a child of rugby reshaped by robust young men off on a new world adventure. The version they devised, rougher, tougher, bloodier, found a home on university athletic fields where the student body became the game's first fans. But this wonderful new game was strictly a Canadian phenomenon until a fateful weekend in 1874 when the men of McGill University accepted an invitation to play 2 matches at Harvard and found the Americans playing a different game entirely, an offshoot of soccer containing little of the rough and tumble chaos now so dear to the Canadians' hearts.
They played 1 game under the Canadian rules, under McGill's rules, 1 game under the Harvard rules. In the end, Harvard enjoyed the type of football that McGill brought so much that they rode away to rugby school in England and they got the official rugby rules.
The game of the North was now a cross-border phenomenon. Soon, it spilled over the campuses and into the cities, then west with the settlers. No longer merely the sport of the educated elite, it became the game of the working masses. Teams sprang out of meetings held in rooms over grocery stores, in mechanics halls and rowing clubs. Bankers bashed ironworkers. Lawyers took their lumps from lumberjacks. Leagues were born, collapsed, and rose again. A new country had a new game and new heroes. By the turn of the century, football had been embraced by athletes of all ages and from all walks of life, competing for trophies of every shape and size. In 1909, word of this new game caught the attention of Albert Henry George Grey, the 4th Earl Grey and the Governor-General of Canada. Well-known patrons of Canadian arts, the Earl and his wife decided that the new game should have a true national championship. At a cost of $48, Lord Grey provided a simple silver trophy that would one day be the stuff of dreams, the Grey Cup.
The cup was donated by the Governor-General, Lord Earl Grey, who probably never saw a game played. He put up the trophy for the Amateur Football Championship of Canada, and people who were playing football in all parts of Canada saw it as emblematic of the national championship.
The first Grey Cup game was held on a chilly December Saturday in 1909. 3,800 fans made the trek to Rosedale Field to watch the University of Toronto defeat the Parkdale Canoe Club in what was rather grandly called the Canadian Championship. But Lord Grey's trophy wasn't there. Someone had forgotten to have it engraved. The games then were simple gatherings, young and not so young athletes out for a rough and tumble afternoon. But soon, Earl Grey's Cup was more than just another trophy. As the decades passed and the number of challengers grew, it would become the new game's Holy Grail. In the 1940s, not even a world in conflict could halt the yearly quest. When Canada went to war, enlisted men formed teams and battled for the cup under military banners. Through rain, fog, mud, or the chill of Canadian winter, the cup chase never faltered. Now the pursuers wanted more than the championship. They wanted that magical, matchless moment when they could grasp Earl Grey's cup and triumphantly hold it high.
When you win the Grey Cup, you know, you're on such a high because you've accomplished what 9 teams start out to do and only 1 does.
What it meant to the city of Winnipeg and the fans, that's when it starts sinking in of just how important the Grey Cup is and what it means to the people of Canada.
It really didn't hit you till a few days later, and you know, when you get back in Edmonton and you're going to the parade and say, hey, this is kind of a big deal.
The city of Vancouver, on our return, just opened their arms to us. A marvelous thing and very special. There was love here for the BC Lions.
20 below weather, the streets were lined all the way from the airport entrance to City Hall, where they took us back to on buses, and the town just went nuts.
Every team sets out and you want to win the championship. Win the championship. That is a successful season. Anything else isn't successful.
It didn't really hit me after the game. It hit me the next year, seeing that this trophy is going to be forever. Your name's going to be a part of it, and you're going to be associated with the Grey Cup winning team.
Canadian football's eastern roots gave this rugged game at least a touch of refinement. Out west, settlers toughened by hardship and prairie winters reveled in their own bone-crushing version, fought with a ferocity and abandon that turned a simple game into a no-quarter battle.
They just threw money into the pot, and the first one that drew blood got the money. There were a lot of broken bones and broken noses and front teeth missing and that kind of thing. In first game, Regina played against Saskatoon. Up in Saskatoon, the police chief was so upset with the fact that the Regina team was winning, and he thought they were playing too rough against the Saskatoon boys, that he came on the field and had the Regina team arrested.
In spite of the potential for injury or arrest, football thrived on the Canadian prairie. The Hamilton Tigers became the first team to journey west, playing exhibition games in Winnipeg, Moose Jaw, Regina, and Calgary. While Eastern teams were happy to share the game with the West, sharing their championship trophy was another matter.
Only Eastern teams would play for the Grey Cup, and in 1911, the Calgary Tigers won the championship of the West, and they challenged. They wanted to play in the Grey Cup, and the CRU wouldn't let them. They would turn them down. They said, "You didn't play in the East, you can't play challenge for the Grey Cup."
Finally, with great reluctance, the Edmonton Eskimos were allowed to come east in 1921 to challenge Toronto for the right to sip from the Earl's silvered mug. Their timing couldn't have been worse. They ran head-on to the man known as the Big Train, Lionel Conacher.
They ended up losing 23-0 in that game. Conacher, as a matter of fact, scored 15 points and halfway through the third quarter had to leave because he had a hockey game that night.
Hockey and football were just two of the many sports on the Conacher resume, all played so brilliantly that he was named Canada's Athlete of the Half-Century. Since 1921, Western teams had marched east for the Grey Cup game, only to fall to the Eastern football powerhouses. In desperation, they cast their eyes not to the heavens, but to the south.
We didn't have the population in the West that they had in the East, so in order to get enough guys, it was we had to supplement them with good, experienced American players from American colleges. And of course, the first, most successful of those teams was the Winnipeg team in 1935.
Winnipeg coach Joe Ryan took a fishing trip to Minnesota and North Dakota that fateful summer of 1935. His bait, money, and he landed his limit. For $7,400, he came home with 9 imports, including the West's first superstar, the incomparable Fritzie Hansen. With Fritzie carrying the mail, the Bombers romped through the West and into the Grey Cup game, where on a muddy field in Hamilton, stunned Easterners got their first look at the little big man from Minnesota.
Fritzie Hansen was an import for Winnipeg, and he was one of these scatbacks that could dangle. And he caught a couple of kicks and ran right through the whole team because nobody had any traction. He had the whole field to himself, and he made the game look easy for Winnipeg, and he made a great name for himself.
In Fritzie and Friends, the Canadian Rugby Union did not see players of great skill. They saw a threat to the very game itself, with teams buying championships and Americans shoving local boys off the roster. Their solution changed the rules.
The CRU decided that they didn't want these American imports coming in specifically to win a competition. So they passed what was called a one-year residency rule. And they said that any American playing in the Grey Cup game had to be in the country for at least 1 year prior to the game.
American imports were now a fact of Canadian football life. Although their numbers increased with the years, they did not destroy the game as the CRU had so darkly predicted. They enhanced it. The Northern League thrived, an alliance that continues to bring great American players to a game that remains distinctly Canadian.
There's something about the Canadian Football League in Canada. It's got a tremendous history about it when you go back and look at some of the great people that have come up here, lived in this country, and they got the opportunity to play. I mean, this is what the game's all about.
It was an opportunity that I was being given that I didn't see happening in my own country. And I really weighed the pros and cons of going to Canada or staying in the United States, and I chose to go to Canada because they were giving me a realistic opportunity to play the game that I love.
I wanted to come play. In the NFL, they would have just used me for, okay, for this and for that. And in Edmonton, I knew I had a chance to do what I wanted to do and play the game.
It put the fun back in football for me. It enabled me to go back out, just be an athlete, play football, and enjoy it. And I'll be forever grateful for that.
During the Depression, there was seldom a penny to spare for children's games. But kids who longed to play football could always find a way.
Nobody had a football, so we'd take somebody's cap, you know the old caps that the kids used to wear, you'll see them in pictures, and stuff it with padding, and so we have no kicking game, so it's a running game only. And that's how we got started.
All our footballs were homemade. We couldn't afford a football. Well, I had something made like a football, made out of a sack or some stuff, sack or a pig's bladder or something like that. But the only time that I ever touched a real football is when I went to high school.
But young boys become young men, and there are real footballs to be thrown and real games to be played. As a pastime becomes a passion, a game becomes a way of life. Though the stakes grow higher and the win's more important, it all comes down to a simple love of the game.
Canadian football was plain, old-fashioned mayhem. You played it, in my day, you played it because you loved the game.
The players didn't make any money. And so they all held jobs. Stukas worked for the Star. And as a football writer, while at the time he was playing, which he certainly gave himself the benefit of the doubt in his stories, Stukas tells the story of playing for the Argonauts when they won the Grey Cup, I think it was 1938, and all he got for it was a windbreaker. He says a really nice windbreaker.
Though the players weren't making any money, they could see by the crowds paying their way into the parks that someone was. They decided it was time they got a piece of the pie. The man the Toronto Argonauts picked to plead their case, Ennis Stukas. Management was quick to respond.
How dare this goddamn football player ask for money? We let them play. We give them great uniforms. We go to the best hotels when we go out of towns. Holy mackerel, and now the guy wants money?
Playing football in Canada was an uncertain profession at best, but the harsh Canadian winter was a virtual guarantee.
I used to die in the cold because you have the lighter uniforms on, so every time you hit the ground, you took a chunk out of your hide. You literally did take a chunk out of your body. And the most painful thing I had to do that day was take a shower. It was so painful to get in that water.
In our first game, the referee had to stand under the goalpost. It was snowing so hard to see if the ball was going through on field goals and extra points. And I'm saying, what did I get myself into here? I'm cold.
Football was a daylight game. If dusk fell before the final gun, finishing the contest required a little help from the crowd.
Fans were urged to park their cars along the sidelines because if the game got going too long, then what would happen was that they'd turn the lights on from their cars and play it out that particular way.
We were playing a game in Ottawa, and we played the last 10 minutes of that game, or 5 minutes of that game, under headlights. They got the people to turn their headlights on in the cars, and that's how we finished the game.
By the 1930s, football had been in Canada for better than a half century, and still the game looked a lot like rugby. The forward pass had found its way into the rule book, but not everyone cared or dared to use it.
The kicking was the essence of the game. What the guys did is that they punted the ball and then ran down underneath it. As the forward pass came in around 1930, there were different rules. For example, if a pass was incomplete, it was a fumble, and so it was used very judiciously.
The man who changed all that was Warren Stevens. In 1931, he threw the Grey Cup's first touchdown pass in Montreal's 22-0 win over Regina. But change requires time. While the forward pass could be a quick and devastating weapon when successful, throwing the ball was still no simple matter.
To be honest with you, we didn't throw that many passes as they do today. The darn balls, they were almost like a soccer ball. It was very difficult to grab a hold of the darn thing, so you laid it on the palm of your hand and threw it. In other words, you didn't grip it.
Well, the ball we used was relatively primitive because it wasn't dimpled to enable the quarterback to grasp it easier. And when I look at it, I can't believe the size and the shape compared to how it is today.
Pass, run, or kick, the name of the game was hitting, and the padding offered little protection.
The equipment I used, people would laugh at. What you got when you went up with the big team was secondhand furniture. At training camp, the new guys coming in took old-timers' equipment from a year or 2 years past. And if the shoes were a size too big, tough luck, wear them.
The post-war years were a boom time for Canadian football. In 1948, the Calgary Stampeders galloped through the three-team West as they recorded the only undefeated season in league history. Heading east, the 4-day train trip became a traveling party as the Stampeders made the cross-country trek to the Grey Cup game. Arriving with Stetson-topped fans, Indian chiefs, chuck wagons, and horses, the Stampeders didn't just come from the West, they brought the West with them.
The 1948 Grey Cup game was pivotal in turning a celebration into a national festival. The Calgary Stampeders brought their chuck wagons, loaded them on the train. They had flapjack breakfasts. They had horses parading through hotel lobbies. It gave it another dimension. And from that time on, I think almost every Grey Cup game has been measured by what happened in 1948.
The Stampeders did more than defeat the Ottawa Rough Riders 12-7. Their victory and their fans' Western exuberance turned a 3-hour showdown into a week-long hoedown. And the party has never stopped. Grey Cup Day has become Grey Cup Week. A game once of regional interest is now a national obsession. And so, the story of the modern-day CFL begins. It is the story of a league often battered but never down. Of a game that is an important thread in the Canadian cultural fabric. A game that is ours and ours alone.
Canadian football is something I was brought up on. I love the game because it's quick. It has always allowed the quarterback to be able to run with the ball, and I thoroughly enjoyed that challenge.
The excitement in the game, in a Canadian football game, with the 3 downs, with the wider field, with the kick return, it may be the best game in the world to watch on television.
It's so fast, it's so wide open, and I think it speaks to my personality. It's sort of a living on the edge type of football game.
It's exciting. You're never out of a ball game in the Canadian Football League. And as a quarterback, that's all you want is a chance. You want to have the ball in your hands with 1 minute to play and give your team a chance to win the ball game.
The Canadian Football League is arguably the most significant cultural institution in the country as it relates to bringing cities across the country together.
It's the one thing, the one professional sport that we have left that we can say is purely Canadian. It's the only one.